Well, we're back with Masterclass, and this is YouTube Masterclass, and we're teaching for Calarts, USC, and Harvard. It's film classes, and this film class was on Quentin Tarantino Auteur. And last time we were in class, we talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood being his last movie, kind of this end-all, be-all movie that's in the post-apocalyptic world that's filling these like pop cultural high and low cultural mixes. You know, they're postmodern elements that you take the pastiche block and you find where it is either laden with montage or mise en scène, and you put the scenes together in such a way that it creates a grammar. And the scenes that connect together are a grammar. And in Tarantino's case, you kind of have these rises and falls, like Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. You know that was one of his favorite books, so it's like this rise and fall. And what I mean by that is the action starts spiraling and going upwards. That means it's increasing, the action's increasing. And then it hits a conflict point, and you learn this in like grade school writing that like when the climax is resolved, it's the uh, the closure on the film. And the closure on the film or the book or anything that works in text and in cinema case, it's kind of painterly, especially with Tarantino. That means you look into the painting and you kind of see things from different points of view all the time you're looking at it, and it looks like a different painting every time you kind of move your eyes, so every few seconds it looks different. And you realize that it's the painterly quality makes you feel as though you're painting it while the painters are painting it. You know, writerly means writing while the writers are writing it. And if you go painterly, that just means cinematically, the visuals are coming across and they're making you think it's your idea for the movie, even though it's Tarantino making you think it's your idea for the movie. So that's really good because I mean he leads this like giant train of beautiful like greatest show on earth things and then blows it up like with the car crash, but then it becomes grisly at the beginning, grisly at the end, grisly in the middle, like kind of like a Sam Peckinpah movie where you had the blood ballets, blood splashing going in slow mo, you know, up in the air. Peckinpah had a lot to. I mean, he's gone but not forgotten. But Peckinpah had a lot of westerns that had the violence was aestheticized, like Hitchcock. You know, Hitchcock always aestheticized his violence, and that was like because that way he drew attention to the art, and you'd be more paying attention to the cinema, and it in a way it softens the blow for artists because they can see why they'd show that scene just to prove that they could do that montage in Psycho, for instance. And the scene was more important because of the montage, but that it was the slasher hacker beginning of all slasher hacker films is great. I can kind of see more Hitchcock and Tarantino and Grindhouse, and then Robert Rodriguez kind of Hitchcocking it out a little bit, but he's more of like a director like, oh, I'll do his own. I would go back in my mind and think, well, is he like Alfonso Cuarón? A little bit, but that's Spain. Guillermo del Toro's from Mexico, but I'm not really sure if he's not from Spain too, and they'll move to Mexico. But really, you got to feel for anyone down in Mexico right now, because I don't know, the country's doing great, and I love the place, but I'd really like to like see peace between us all. You know, it's just my wish. But that's my own proselytizing. Tarantino, on the other hand, has causes of his own. We won't get into that. He has causes of his own that are probably his priority. And let's face it, this doesn't just make him eccentric. It's not really eccentric that he is. He has private projects. Every artist wants to celebrate their privacy, and one of the advantages to finally making a good film is to celebrate your privacy. In a world where privacy isn't even cared about, and everywhere people are crashing in on privacy and saying, if I heard you do it at all, it wasn't privacy. And I'm not saying that really ever happens, and I'm not saying that anybody would really have a thought police that could like hear into your mind. But when you're watching a Tarantino movie, it's like, especially like the foreign versions with the subtitles. The foreign versions with the subtitles sometimes have dubbed language and then the English subtitles, and it's like you're reading their mind. That's why I like subtitles. It's like you're reading their mind. Because when you watch them face to face, your mind is here, their mind is here, and the subtitle comes across. And so it's like, I like that you automatically pick up what's going on down there once you're trained. And these are foreign films that they've made out of the Tarantino films, and they're usually bootlegs, and they could be illegal, so we shouldn't talk about that. And again, we're not just, that's what I'm saying, we're not just talking about eccentricity. We're talking about things that are off the beaten path from normal understanding, that the higher up you go among directors, all the way to Tarantino, you'd see that like has this enormous amount of control over his work. He has rhythm, fantasy too, like many others. But the fantasy comes in the guise of the realism. And the realism is where, of course, we take it to the gritty action coming involved, and the aestheticized violence. The aestheticized violence being an artistic view of what violence looks like, simulated in a cinematic way. So now that we've got that covered, I think it's time to look at other meanings of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because now Al Pacino's in this film and he plays a film producer, and one thing about Tarantino is he likes an ensemble cast. There's always big stars in his film, and I'm not going to discuss like whether it's eccentric or whether it's necessary, because as Tarantino it seems more necessary. That's what I'm saying. So necessary to change the end of the Manson gig, and we won't go too deep into that, is that we changed history. We probably shouldn't have, but we did, so we should have. And it's a way to change history because film is a time machine. If you watch this now, it'll be the future when you watch this tomorrow. I mean, the time you could even do a fun thing, for your final and change the ending to this one and be like they all lived happily ever after. But that would be a bad ending to put on, except in Kill Bill and Jackie Brown, where the women escape in their vehicles. And Pulp Fiction kind of has a happy ending. It did end theoretically with Bruce Willis driving off camera, but it theoretically ended in the same motion for John Travolta in that same sequence, The Gold Watch. But that Samuel L. Jackson walks out the restaurant in like pleasant optimism in the face of nihilistic extinctionism. This is good. And I only use those terms as postmodern. Now you got to remember the high and low cult isn't whether it's bad or good. The low cult it doesn't really judge that. The low cult is basically things that cost less. And the high cult is the things that cost more. But the things that cost less sometimes cost more and cost up here anyway. And in Hollywood, it's like there's kind of an agreement made to have Tarantino just get the all access card. I mean, right when he made Reservoir Dogs, he was doing all those classes where he's like teaching genres and art. And it was a class like this. Honestly, it was probably a masterclass. But like they changed that to YouTube Masterclass, but it's the same kind of thing. I don't know if all the archives are on YouTube. I should have looked at that, but I found a Tarantino interviews, and I don't really want to quote him on anything because I would like to, but it's not that I don't have to quote. It's just that I respect other people's opinions, even if they're not mine. But he has opinions like mine. I respect other people's opinions no matter what they are. I'm not just going to go booting them out in a class. This isn't a Skeletons of the Closet type class. The Skeletons of the Closet are in the movie, like the scene with the Gimp is the skeleton in the closet. But it doesn't have anything to do with his personal life, see what I'm saying? It doesn't. That's where people need to realize the director is separate from what he makes, but not totally. Like some of the things you'll see in the film are his impression because there's things he's actually seen in life that he's kind of recreating. You can see him in the documentary with the car, with the camera, and he's kind of repeating, refraining, and coming back into this sort of Hollywood style on his first film. And he's already being backed by Miramax or Band Apart. And Band Apart is the company that was named after the Jean-Luc Godard film, Band Apart. We've said this a lot. The Band Apart actually means the outsiders, I think, in French, and it's like a band apart, a group, a gangs apart. But we've had the mysterious titles like Reservoir Dogs, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has this really interesting faction, and then we're going to get to the final. At the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it shows the title. And it's probably, besides like Meet the Fablemans, the last movie that's ever come out. And then some artists have had a few, you know. And I think that it's great to know that the greatest directors made it to the end. We all made it to the end. Martin Scorsese, I don't know if this is the end. Because people preach that only to say, well, we got 70 movies out this week. And then sometimes they get out. I got nothing against an AI film if it's like a cartoon or something. I don't know really how you could compatibilize AI with writing a film. Like, I don't know whether or not there's components of AI that are good or bad. There are things I've studied about it, like that AI is random. And Pulp Fiction's not random. None of the movies are random. They seem random, but when you watch them, they fall into place like a puzzle right at the end. Like Citizen Kane. It's like this whole puzzle that you're putting pieces to, and then it all fits together. Because, again, I'm going to say in Pulp Fiction, for instance, and this happens a little bit in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's more of a linear plot, but Pulp Fiction, since it goes all over the place, is taking montages that look like Kane. And the Kane montage is like jumping all over. Because in Pulp Fiction, there's long stretches that are in one chapter, but there's these like sort of filament chapters that are all over the narrative. But it's not random. It's put together in the best way the story is told, not in the way the temporal action is given, the time related to the film. So, congratulations, you've heard the whole class. I think I'm going to give the final now. What it is compare and contrast Tarantino's films. One of his films, particularly, see them all, and one of his films in particularly, you pick, and you compare and contrast with a movie, just any movie that you love, and say what's like and dislike the movie. We did this kind of back in semester one of this whole thing, back in Film Criticism 1, and I'm telling you that the other idea you could use for a final is, besides just compare and contrast, you could compare and contrast two Tarantino movies and see what differences and what similarities they have in things to look for are like genre, neo-noir, technique. That's a technique, and technique is more like the placement of the camera, the placement of the actors, the moving around of the actors, the telling the actors to move, telling them what to say, telling what camera to move. That's all for 3 seconds of a shot on most films, and sometimes quicker, and sometimes Tarantino would let the film go on a while. But remember that we're also looking for thematic things, like what makes art aesthetic when it shows violence. Why is violence more aestheticized? Is it to draw attention to it and resensitize us? Or does it desensitize us by just having an artistic montage over the violence? And is that a bad thing? Because what's desensitized? That just means we don't even care that there's people blowing up. We do, but like it's not giving us the same catharsis because the people are blowing up and we're like, what time's this movie over? And we're not like that with Tarantino. But like, I'm not saying we're like that with all directors. And most movie fans would stick to the screen. I'm not trying to insult anyone. I'm just saying that like if you compared a Tarantino to a Tarantino, then that'd be interesting. And I think that you can find elements in the films that define him and the way he teaches. And so the resonance from this is we're just going to use those as the final, one or the other. Turn it into Coursera, they'll grade it. And type it up, type it up, turn it in. If you want to turn it into me, that's fine. You can turn it into me. But there are 4 credits awarded for this class once the final is taken. Thank you, Coursera. And one last thing, we'll say it again. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Kill Bill, Grindhouse. Next is Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained, Hateful Eight, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Thank you for tuning into this class.